The world lay in ruins, stripped of its former glory. Great cities, once filled with life, had become skeletal remains, their metal bones twisted and blackened. The skies, thick with the perpetual haze of burning debris, bore witness to the conquest of the Vrakuth. Their sleek patrol ships drifted above like silent sentinels, their eerie blue lights casting ghostly glows over the desolate streets below. Where once stood towering monuments to human achievement, now only wreckage remained, testaments to a war that had been over before it had even begun. Scattered across this wasteland, the last remnants of humanity clung to existence. They scavenged through the rubble, searching for food, weapons, anything that could be of use. Electricity was a forgotten luxury. Fire was survival. The once mighty global powers had crumbled, their leaders either dead or in hiding. No armies marched to reclaim the planet. No government declared war. There was only the resistance. Small, fractured groups of survivors who refused to surrender, each fending for themselves in the shadows of what once was. The Vrakuth did not see them as a threat. Why would they? Humanity's technology had been crippled by the first wave of electromagnetic pulses that swept across the planet. Advanced weaponry was rendered useless, leaving only what could be crafted by hand. But the aliens underestimated them. Where brute force had failed, ingenuity remained. A sharpened edge of broken glass, a slingshot powered by scavenged rubber, a trap constructed from nothing but wire and instinct. Humanity had been thrown back into the age of crude tools, but their minds remained as sharp as ever. Ilias Vance had never seen himself as a leader. A former engineer, his world had been one of blueprints and equations, not war and survival. But survival had a way of changing people. He had been there when the first wave hit, watching the sky turn to fire as the invaders descended. He had been there when the screams turned to silence, when the streets became hunting grounds, when the machines of war had fallen still. And he was still here now, leading a ragged group of survivors through the ruins of a world that no longer belonged to them. He did not command through orders or rank. There were no officers left, no chains of command. He led because people followed him, because in a world where strength had failed, strategy still mattered. He did not waste lives in reckless charges or mindless defiance. He knew that survival was a puzzle, one that required patience, planning, and precision. Mira Lee was the only one among them who still had hope. A linguist before the war, she had spent years studying ancient languages, believing that understanding the past could shape the future. Now, she worked to decipher the symbols the Vrakuth left behind, trying to find meaning in the incomprehensible. If she could crack their language, perhaps they could learn more than just survival. Perhaps they could fight on equal footing. Darren Hammer Cole had no interest in language. His war was personal. A former soldier, he had been on the front lines when the invasion began, and he had watched entire divisions disappear under the weight of alien firepower. He fought not for strategy, not for hope, but for vengeance. Where Elias calculated, Darren struck. Where Elias planned, Darren executed. If the resistance had a sword, it was him. Dr. Anika Patel did not carry weapons, but she wielded something far deadlier, knowledge. A biologist, she studied the enemy with the same intensity she once reserved for dissecting microbial life. The Vrakuth were not invincible. They had weaknesses, and she was determined to find them. If they bled, she would learn why. If they could die, she would learn how. They had been hiding for weeks, evading patrols, moving through the ruins with careful precision. But one night, something changed. A patrol of Vrakuth, 6 of them, armed but unaware, wandered too close to their hideout. Elias knew the old ways of war were useless. They could not meet the enemy head-on, but they could make them bleed. Traps had been set, simple things, crude things, but effective. A metal wire, barely visible in the dim firelight, snapped tight around the ankle of one alien, yanking it off balance. The moment of confusion was all they needed. Darren was the first to move, a sharpened spear in hand, driving it through the weak point of the alien's armor. A gurgling hiss escaped from the Vrakuth's throat before it collapsed. The others reacted, weapons raised, but the humans were already moving. Mira threw a handful of crushed limestone into the air, blinding two of them. Elias struck next, his weapon nothing more than a makeshift club, cracking through the exposed joint of another. They had no energy shields, no plasma rifles, just muscle and instinct. It was over in less than a minute. 6 Vrakuth lay dead at their feet. Elias stood over one of the bodies, his chest rising and falling in sharp breaths. It had worked. It had actually worked. The invaders could die. They were not untouchable. They bled, and more importantly, they could feel fear. Amidst the wreckage of the fallen patrol, something glowed softly. A device. Sleek, unfamiliar, humming with power. Elias knelt, brushing away the dust. This was not a weapon, nor was it armor. It was something else. A map? A communication tool? Or something far greater? He did not know. But what he did know, what he could feel in his very bones, was that this changed everything. For the first time in a long time, humanity had hope. The Vrakuth moved with cold precision, their exoskeletal armor glinting beneath the dim, dust-choked light. Every movement was calculated, every patrol synchronized. Yet, in the ruins of a world they had shattered, they were blind to the shifting shadows, deaf to the whisper of humanity's quiet rebellion. Elias crouched in the remains of a collapsed overpass, watching the aliens through a crude scope fashioned from scavenged glass. They walked with an air of superiority, their posture rigid, their weapons always ready. And yet he saw it. The split-second hesitation in their steps, the awkward readjustment of their balance. Earth's gravity worked against them. Their armor, so effortlessly fluid in lower G environments, slowed them here. Even their reflexes, superior as they were, lagged in the thick atmosphere. They relied on their technology like a crutch. Their helmets fed them targeting data. Their suits enhanced their movements. Their weapons locked onto enemies faster than the eye could follow. Take those away, and they were just flesh and bone. The humans had neither energy shields nor plasma rifles. What they had was ingenuity. From the ruins, Elias and his team set the stage. Tripwires, fashioned from old electrical cabling, ran low between piles of rubble. Fire-hardened spears lay hidden in the dark, their tips coated with scavenged oils and resin to burn on impact. Smoke bombs, primitive but effective, lined their escape routes, filled with the fine dust of shattered concrete to clog alien respirators. Hilltop, the patrol passed into the kill zone. A subtle shift of weight, a foot placed just wrong, and the wire snapped. The alien barely had time to process the sound before the ground gave way beneath it, plunging into a pit lined with sharpened steel rods. It screamed, a high chittering sound, cut short as a spear drove through its throat. The others reacted instantly, weapons raised, scanning for threats. They didn't expect the attack to come from above. From the skeletal remains of a high-rise, Darren released a chunk of debris, sending it crashing into the patrol below. The shockwaves scattered them. That was the opening. Elias surged forward, a makeshift club in hand. He swung low, striking the side of an alien's knee joint, buckling it. Before it could recover, Mira drove a sharpened blade into the exposed gap between its plating, a fine mist of dark blood spraying across the rubble. The alien gurgled, collapsed. The fight was brutal, messy. Humans were weaker, slower, but they were unpredictable, and unpredictability in war was deadlier than any weapon. When it was over, the Vrakuth lay dead. Not invincible, not gods, just another enemy that could be beaten. Mira knelt beside one of the bodies, fingers tracing the strange, curling symbols carved into its armor. She had seen these before, in the ruins, in the wreckage of their war machines. They weren't just insignias. They were messages, orders, warnings. She ran a hand over the curved plates, pressing against a section just above the chest. A small, recessed panel hissed open, revealing a glyph-covered slate pulsing with dim light. A message scrawled in the alien's native tongue flickered across its surface. She whispered the translation under her breath. Traitor, the Vrakuth weren't unified. There were fractures in their ranks. Some of them weren't here to conquer, some were running. If humanity could exploit that division, they might stand a chance. But the Vrakuth learned quickly. They adapted, and in the wake of the ambush, they did not retreat. They retaliated. The sky burned as the purge began. Survivor enclaves, long dead among the ruins, were rooted out. Plasma bombardments rained down upon shattered cities, reducing them to smoldering craters. Those who had survived the first invasion found themselves hunted once more. The invaders did not seek prisoners. They did not offer ultimatums. They wiped away resistance with the cold efficiency of an exterminator cleansing a pest. Elias and his team watched the carnage from the shadows. There was no time to mourn, no time to think. They had made a mistake. They had drawn blood too early, and now the enemy was lashing out. Drones scoured the ruins, sweeping for heat signatures, movement, even the faintest breath of resistance. The team ran. They had no choice. Through the gutted remains of a shopping district, across streets fused into molten glass, through corridors choked with the dead, the drones followed, silent and merciless. Mira gasped as her foot struck loose debris, her body collapsing against the side of an overturned vehicle. The machines turned at once. Elias didn't hesitate. A quick flick of his hand and a flare ignited, its heat signature drawing the drones away just long enough for them to slip into the sewers beneath the city. Darkness swallowed them. Their lungs burned. They had barely survived. Not everyone had been as lucky. Through the wreckage of fallen patrols, through the bodies left in the wake of the purge, they searched for anything of value, weapons, food, anything to keep them alive for one more day. That was when Elias saw it. A dull glow pulsed beneath the broken shell of an alien exosuit, faint but unmistakable. He reached for it. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, the device came to life. A shimmer of blue light flared outward, resolving into shifting symbols, then into a holographic map. Lines stretched beneath the earth, a vast network of tunnels and chambers. At its center, buried deep beneath the ruins of what had once been Washington, D.C., pulsed a command node, a Vrakuth stronghold, the enemy's nerve center, their control hub, a target. For the first time, they had more than survival. They had a chance to strike back. For the first time, humanity wasn't just running. They were at war. The map pulsed with eerie blue light, casting faint shadows against the cracked concrete walls. Elias traced the intricate pathways it displayed, his mind already working through the variables. The underground command post, buried deep beneath what had once been the heart of civilization, was the key. The plan was madness. They had no sophisticated weaponry, no war machines to match the Vrakuth's technological might. The only advantage they had was that the enemy didn't see them as a true threat. That arrogance would cost them. There would be no direct assault. That was suicide. This would be sabotage, chaos. They would strike the heart of the Vrakuth infrastructure, disrupt their command systems, and force them into disarray. The invaders relied on their technology for everything: communications, strategy, even basic battlefield awareness. Elias would make sure they lost it all. The weight of the plan settled over the gathered resistance fighters, their expressions a mix of grim determination and quiet resignation. This wasn't just another raid. This wasn't just survival. This was a war they might not return from. A mission like this couldn't be done alone. They needed more fighters. The search for allies took them across a ravaged landscape, between crumbling cities and long abandoned roads, through the skeletal remains of what had once been thriving communities. Survivors lurked in the ruins, their eyes sunken, their bodies hardened by hunger and loss. Some refused. They had seen too much death. They had lost too much. Others agreed, not out of hope, but out of vengeance. Arguments broke out. Some wanted to flee, find somewhere the Vrakuth wouldn't bother chasing them. Others wanted to burn every last alien to the ground, no matter the cost. Darren was the one who put it simply: fight together or die alone. They had no firearms, no vehicles, no drones to aid them. They had only their hands, their minds, and the ingenuity that had defined humanity for centuries. Weapons were fashioned from whatever could be salvaged. Spears of sharpened rebar, slings capable of hurling jagged debris, bows crafted with scavenged wiring and repurposed metal rods. The Vrakuth were stronger, faster, better armed, but humans had fire. They had discovered the aliens' weakness in an earlier skirmish. Extreme heat compromised their armor, their exoskeletons cracking under sudden thermal shifts. Now, crude flame-based tools were built from old welding torches. Gasoline siphoned from abandoned vehicles turned into deadly firebombs. More than weapons, they built the traps. Mechanical horrors crafted from the wreckage of their own cities. Pressure plates repurposed from old infrastructure, hidden beneath dirt and rubble. Swinging deadfalls made from collapsed scaffolding. Ruins turned into weapons of war. If the Vrakuth thought humanity was finished, they had made a grave mistake. Amid the planning, Mira combed through the markings on captured enemy gear. She had suspected it before, but now there was no doubt. Some of the Vrakuth were not aligned with the invasion. The symbols told a story of castes, of rank, of obedience, that had been forced upon even their own kind. There were traitors among the enemy. The question remained, did that mean potential allies? The revelation sparked another divide. Darren scoffed at the idea. To him, the Vrakuth were butchers, all of them, no exceptions. They had torn through humanity without hesitation, and there was no forgiving that. Mira argued the opposite. If there was division among their ranks, it could be exploited. If there were defectors, they could be turned. The war didn't have to be all or none. Elias stood between them, caught in the impossible choice. That choice was ripped from his hands when a rogue band of survivors, unwilling to wait for a strategy, struck at the Vrakuth command post ahead of schedule. The attack was a disaster. The aliens weren't caught off guard. They were ready. Plasma fire cut through the attackers before they ever got close. The bodies of the fallen were left as a message to those who still lived. And now, the Vrakuth knew the resistance was coming. Security around the command post doubled. The careful advantage they had been trying to create was gone. What could have been a tactical infiltration had turned into a death sentence. Doubt crept into the ranks. Some questioned whether they could still go through with the mission. If the aliens were this prepared, what chance did they have? Dr. Patel found their answer in the unlikeliest of places. A pathogen, native to Earth, harmless to humans, lethal to the Vrakuth. The implications were immediate. Release it, and the war could end. The aliens would be wiped out, every last one. Victory, total and complete. But at what cost? Elias sat in silence, the weight of the decision pressing against his chest. This wasn't just a battle anymore. This was genocide. Darren had no hesitation. If it meant wiping out the enemy, it had to be done. Mira, however, recoiled at the thought. If they resorted to biological warfare, were they any better than the ones who had tried to exterminate them? Elias didn't answer, not yet. Instead, he turned back to the map. They still had a mission to finish. As night fell, preparations were finalized. Weapons were distributed, final instructions given. They had lost the element of surprise, but the plan remained the same. They would infiltrate the command post. They would destroy the enemy's infrastructure from within, and if Elias had to make the final decision about the pathogen, he would do it when the moment came. One way or another, this was the night that would decide humanity's fate. Darkness swallowed them whole as they moved deeper into the underground stronghold. Bioluminescent veins pulsed along the walls, casting an eerie blue glow that flickered with the rhythmic hum of alien machinery. The tunnel stretched endlessly, an intricate maze of twisting passageways and vaulted corridors. The air was thick with a sterile scent, tinged with something acrid and unfamiliar. Weapons were gripped tightly, crude, handmade, and woefully outmatched against the sleek lethality of the Vrakuth. But it didn't matter. The mission was simple: get in, tear out the enemy's backbone, and get out. The odds meant nothing now. Failure was not an option. Shadows moved in the distance. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. The Vrakuth had underestimated humanity's resilience before. This time, they wouldn't see the end coming until it was too late. The plan was chaos. The Vrakuth thrived in order, in control. That control would be ripped from them piece by piece. Their infrastructure, their technology, it was their greatest strength, but it would also be their undoing. Water and sand, thrown into exposed circuits, sent entire banks of machinery into spasms. Lights flickered, screens distorted, alien glyphs glitching into unreadable static. Their once impenetrable security became a vulnerability. The oxygen pumps, vital to their species' respiratory needs, burned easily. Crude firebombs, made from scavenged chemicals and human ingenuity, ignited, sending flames licking along the pipes. The base shuddered with the first signs of internal collapse. And then came the real terror. Earth's predators, drawn by scent and vibration, were unleashed into the corridors. Snakes, starved and desperate, slid into ventilation shafts. Wild dogs, their teeth sharpened by weeks of scavenging, darted through the halls, tearing into exposed alien flesh. Rats, infected with human-borne pathogens, scurried into food supplies. Panic spread like wildfire. The Vrakuth had conquered Earth, but they had never tamed it. A figure loomed in the dim blue glow of a failing console, eyes alien, yet oddly familiar in their uncertainty. A Vrakuth, alone, unarmed. Not attacking! Commander Siltan did not raise his weapon. He did not call for his brethren. Instead, his voice, thick with an unplaceable accent, carried a message. The humans were too late. The Vrakuth had planned for this. If they fell, Earth would fall with them. A failsafe buried in the heart of their network. One command, one final act of defiance, and the planet would be cleansed in nuclear fire. But Siltan was no loyalist. He was a fugitive, a traitor to his own kind. And for the first time, humanity had an ally among their enemies. The decision fractured the team before it was even spoken. Darren's fury burned hotter than the fires consuming the corridors. The aliens had scorched Earth without mercy. Why should humanity hesitate? There was no choice. The bioweapon would be released. Let the Vrakuth suffer the same fate they had inflicted. Mira recoiled, her voice rising above the chaos. This was genocide. If humanity crossed this line, there would be no going back. There was another way. There had to be. Siltan knew how to dismantle the failsafe. They could still win without becoming monsters. Elias stood at the edge of an abyss. One step forward and he would be the man who unleashed extinction. One step back and he might doom them all. His hands clenched the vial. The pathogen, deadly, irreversible, final, glistened in the dim light. A single drop was all it would take. The decision was made. A controlled release, a test, a warning. The virus spread through a single chamber, engulfing a contingent of Vrakuth. The result was instantaneous. Exoskeletons darkened, cracked, melted from the inside. The screams, inhuman, guttural, rippled through the comms network before cutting to static. Horror flickered in the eyes of those who watched. The Vrakuth were not immune. The bioweapon worked, and yet, Elias did not unleash it fully. He had proven humanity's power, but he would not let their legacy be written in blood alone. The mission was not over. The command post still stood, its core pulsing with data, the failsafe ticking down to oblivion. The final blow would not come from disease, it would come from fire. Explosives, hastily set, lined the primary conduits. Fires raged, unchecked. The base trembled under its own failing systems. The walls cracked, metal groaned, support beams buckled under the weight of destruction. The team ran, smoke thick in their lungs, the heat of the detonation searing against their backs. A final blast roared behind them, sending shockwaves through the tunnels. The ground heaved, the stronghold crumbled. The war had changed. The command network was gone. The Vrakuth forces, leaderless, scattered. The invasion had failed. But victory tasted like ash. Thousands were dead, human and alien alike. The cities that remained were husks of what they had once been. The air was thick with the stench of loss. Silken watched his people die, knowing there would be no redemption for him among them. Mira stared at the devastation, wondering if peace had ever been possible. Darren stood with his weapon still drawn, eyes scanning the horizon, already looking for the next fight. And Elias felt the weight of a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The war wasn't over. It had only changed shape. The battlefield was silent, but it was not peace. Smoke curled into the sky, thick with the scent of burning metal and something darker, something that clung to the lungs. The once imposing Vrakuth stronghold lay in ruin, its bioluminescent veins flickering like the dying embers of a great beast. The command network was severed, the invaders fractured. Some fled, retreating into the cold abyss of deep space, their ships vanishing like shadows on the wind. Others turned on each other, no longer bound by the will of their central command, descending into infighting that echoed through the ruins like the last gasps of a dying empire. The war was over, but victory did not feel like triumph. From the wreckage, the survivors emerged. Hollow-eyed, their bodies caked in soot and blood, they stood among the remains of their world and dared to ask, was it worth it? Some spoke in hushed voices, their words laced with uncertainty. The bioweapon had been held back, just enough to send a message, just enough to prove humanity's power. But should it have been unleashed in full? Had mercy been a mistake? Would the Vrakuth return in force, this time with no hesitation, no restraint? Had Earth been spared, or had it merely been placed on borrowed time? Elias moved through the ruins like a ghost, his steps heavy with the weight of decisions that could never be undone. The faces of the dead lined his vision, human and alien alike, their final moments etched into the debris. He had led them here, he had made the call. And now, in the silence that followed, he wondered if survival had come at too great a cost. They had won, but had they lost themselves in the process? Mira did not dwell on ghosts. The battle was over, but the war had left scars that would not heal easily. The surviving Vrakuth were scattered, some surrendering, others clinging to the last vestiges of their shattered hierarchy. Commander Siltan stood among them, the weight of his own choices pressing down upon him like gravity itself. He was a traitor to his own kind, but what did that make him now? The first of many, or the last of his species, to stand alongside humanity. Negotiations began, but the path to peace was treacherous. Too many had suffered at the hands of the Vrakuth. Too many saw surrender as another deception, another trap. Whispers of sabotage spread through the resistance. Some refused to acknowledge the possibility of coexistence, their wounds too fresh, their hatred too deep. The fragile truce hung by a thread, frayed and worn, and Mira knew that the smallest spark could reduce it to ash. Darren did not wait for the spark. He had fought too long, lost too much. The war was not over, not for him, and not for those who followed him. The Vrakuth had not been exterminated. That, in his eyes, was failure. He gathered those who shared his rage, those who saw the surrendering aliens not as prisoners but as prey. They were not resistance fighters anymore. They were something else, something darker. And as Darren's faction grew, as his message spread like wildfire through the embers of the fallen world, a new war was born, not against an alien empire, but against themselves. The enemy had changed. Perhaps humanity had too. The stars loomed above, indifferent and eternal. Earth had survived, but it was not alone. The Vrakuth were only one voice in the vast chorus of the universe, only one empire among countless others that drifted through the cold void. The war had been won, but the question remained, would humanity survive the next one? The ruins stretched far beyond the horizon, a graveyard of shattered steel and scorched earth. Smoke curled in sluggish spirals, whispering to the wind of battles fought and lives lost. The embers of war still smoldered, but the fire had burned itself out. A lone figure sat amid the wreckage, a relic of humanity's defiance against extinction. Blood crusted his knuckles, his clothes torn and stained with the grime of a world that had fought back against its conquerors and won. A recording device flickered in his grip, its battered casing barely holding together after the siege. The voice that broke the silence was steady, but beneath it lay the weight of a man who had seen too much, done too much. We fought with bare hands and sharp minds, and we won. Eyes like dying stars stared into the abyss of the battlefield, searching for meaning in the ruins. That survival is not victory. It is a question, one we must answer with what comes next. The dead had no answers. The ground was still warm with the heat of fallen war machines, but already hands moved to bury the bodies that could be found. The resistance, what remained of it, gathered the wreckage of their world piece by piece, though there were no celebrations, no triumphant cheers, only silence. And in that silence, a whisper. The pulse of a distant signal flickered through the remnants of the alien network, a soundless echo that rippled through the ruins like an unseen hand reaching out into the dark. It was not Vrakuth. The war with them was over. This was something else. Something watching. Something listening. Perhaps something hunting. The final words of the message hung in the air, recorded for whoever would find them in the days, years, or lifetimes to come. What comes next? Earth was no longer weak, no longer overlooked. For so long, humanity had been the prey, the desperate, the forgotten. That time had passed. They had survived an empire that had conquered worlds without struggle. They had defied extinction. They had made the impossible real. But what did that make them now? Conquerors? Defenders? Or just another species clawing its way up the food chain, waiting for the next predator to come? Far beyond the wreckage, in the depths of the void where no human had yet walked, something stirred. A distant object, vast and unknown, shifted course. The signal had reached it. It had heard. And now it was coming. The war was over. But the next battle may have already begun.